according to the theory of evolution, the origin and development of the universe and all its systems can be explained solely on the basis of time, chance, and continuing processes. All living things have arisen from a single-celled organism. A second and opposing worldview is the concept of creation. According to the theory of creation, everything in the universe has come into being through the design, purpose, and deliberate acts of a supernatural creator. That means this creator created the universe, the earth, and all life on earth, including all types of plants and animals, as well as humans. On today's edition of Origins, we'll talk about human cloning.
Friends, my name's Donn Chapman, and this is Origins, and we're delighted to have you with us today. You know, Origins is a forum where we take the evidence of science and use it to confirm the truth of creation. And so I hope you'll welcome with me today Dr. Brad Harrub, who is from Apologetics Press. And Brad, it's thrilled to have you here today.
It's very good to be here.
And I want to thank you for the research and the thought that you've done into this subject, because I think this is one where the church is left out there kind of behind and needs some answers. And so talk to us about human cloning, how we got here, and what Christians should do about it. Will you do that?
You know, there's a lot of questions because folks want to know, what should a Christian's response be to cloning, to stem cell research, to some of these new and ever-changing medical technologies. You know, there was a time in the past when medicine was practiced for the good of humanity. The days of Alexander Fleming, Louis Pasteur, but somewhere along the line, something changed. And it appears today that science has taken on a whole new attitude. There was a poem written by a fellow named William Ernest Henley. The poem title is called Invictus. And I think that particular poem, the last two stanzas, represent pretty well the attitude of science today. The poem ends like this. It says, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." So, you know, think with me how the whole field of research has changed as that mentality has kind of taken over all of the scientific knowledge around us today. I want to share with you real quickly, Donn, just a couple of the things that we already have experienced. For instance, in 1998, in the May issue of Science magazine, Science Journal, a company called Advanced Cell Technology reported that they had created the world's first transgenic cow-human hybrid. It was an embryo that possessed the DNA of both a cow and a human.
That's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, and you know, it doesn't stop there. The very next year, Japanese researchers used those same methods to create 27 of these cow humans. They allowed them to grow for about 5 to 10 days and then intentionally destroyed them.
Now, there's a couple of things that jump into my mind when you bring this up. The first one is, I guess, why would anyone want to?
Well, while we can't be for sure what their purposes were, we know one of the purposes that many of these companies are pursuing this avenue is because they can get around the worldwide ban on human cloning.
You know, I just can't help but point out that it seems to me that when we've moved as a culture away from believing in absolute truth to relative truth, where we can't say what is right and what is wrong. Now, for the Christian, we can still say that.
That's right.
But we're teaching our kids from early on that it may be right for you, but it's not right for somebody else, and who's to judge what's right and wrong? Well, we know what's right and wrong. God has said.
That's right.
And that's how we know right and wrong, is by God's revelation. But these scientists aren't looking to God for right and wrong. They're just seeing, what can I do and what can I get away with?
Exactly. And you know, they're bending the rules by simply saying, okay, if I put a little cow DNA in here, then I can clone this, and it's not technically cloning a human. And so that's how they get...
proceed with research they couldn't do if it was all human. Okay.
Exactly, but the question then becomes, why stop at cow-human? 2001, the New Zealand Herald, on March 13th, they reported that scientists had cloned a human pig embryo. And again, they allowed it to grow for several days before then intentionally destroying it. One of the saddest reports came out of a Virginia lab last year, where researchers at that lab, for the very first time in human history, created life for the sole purpose of destroying it. They paid 12 women, they extracted from those women 162 eggs, they fertilized those eggs, they created 50 healthy living embryos, all of which were subsequently destroyed so that the researchers could get to the stem cells inside. When you devalue human life to that point, it's no wonder we have kids today growing up shooting each other over something as trivial as a pair of tennis shoes.
Because we've taught them that this is just another animal. It doesn't really have any value.
That's right.
I don't want to interrupt you, but show us what you got.
Well, I was going to move on to the topic at hand today, and that is human cloning. Back 40, 50 years ago, the thought of cloning was purely science fiction. But today it's a reality. In fact, a fellow by the name of James Watson, he was a Nobel laureate. He was one of the co-discoverers of DNA.
Right.
At one point in the past, he said this. He said, cloning, particularly of something so complex as a mammal with an adult cell, would be impossible.
Now, this isn't Dark Ages. This is the guy who co-founded or co-discovered DNA with Crick.
Exactly.
And he's saying to us that
we're not going to be able to do it.
So we're talking about 1970s, 1980s?
Exactly. And then, of course, as you know the rest of the story, we have a kind of a motto in science, and that is never say never.
Absolutely.
That was then. This is today. Can we clone things? Oh, we've been cloning things since the 1950s. 1950s, a fellow by the name of F.C. Stewart cloned leopard frogs, and we've been cloning vegetables. But people aren't very interested in leopard frogs and vegetables. They want to know, can we clone mammals?
Absolutely.
And more importantly, can we clone humans?
That's right.
In the past, it was very difficult, but Dolly changed all that.
Hello, Dolly.
Hello, Dolly. In February 27th, 1997 issue of Nature, it arrived in our mailbox, and inside of it was an article penned by a fellow named Ian Wilmot. I'm going to go up to the board and show you exactly what Dr. Wilmot did.
Now, which of those is Dolly and which is Dr. Wilmot?
Dolly would be the young one there. And
okay.
The black-faced sheep there would be her surrogate mother.
All right.
If we proceed on, you can see on this particular screen the process that Dr. Wilmot used. He took a cell from a 6-year-old sheep. He took a mammary gland cell from a 6-year-old sheep. He then took an egg cell. He cleaned out the genetic material from that egg cell. He put this 6-year-old genetic material inside. And after he had that in place, he did something kind of unique. He starved that particular cell. And just before a cell dies, it will go into kind of a state of suspended animation, a survival state. It throws out all of its non-essential functions. And just before that cell died, he did two things. He zapped it with electricity, and then he poured the nutrients to it. And that new cell, it woke up, it looked around, and it forgot that it was a 6-year-old mammary gland cell. And all of a sudden, as you can see here on the chart, it began to divide. And so all he had to do at that point was to find a surrogate mother to put it in, and who was born a few months later but Dolly. And folks wanted to know, was she real? And if she's real, is she fertile? Oh, she was real, all right. You might remember in 1998, she was bred to a Scottish mountain ram named David. She gave birth to a little lamb named Bonnie. The very next year, she gave birth to triplets.
Wow.
Since that time, and I'm going to have to look at my chart because this changes just about every month or two. Since that time, we have successfully cloned sheep, mice, cattle, goats, monkeys, pigs, cats, rabbits, horses, deer, and mules. Now, don't ask me why we would want to clone rabbits in the first place.
I was going to ask you why we would want to make more cats, but I'm not going to ask that. You go ahead.
But the question then becomes, okay, if we can clone these creatures, and they're all mammals,
right.
From a biological classification, a human's a mammal.
That's right.
So the question then becomes, can we clone a human? And if we can, should we clone a human?
Those are separate questions.
Exactly. Christians need to understand that anytime science hands you a brand new out-of-the-box technology, that they need to realize, okay, what are the implications of this technology? Let's take a look for just a moment at exactly what are you going to get with a clone. If we were to take a cell from, say, Adolf Hitler and clone that cell, would we get another Adolf Hitler? Well, if you're asking, would it be somebody who would lead a Nazi regime? No. Would it look like Adolf Hitler? Yes. But would it be Adolf Hitler?
So you're
Absolutely.
saying to us that we're shaped by more than just our genes.
Exactly.
Our experiences, our ethics, the people who teach us and speak into our lives and the things that we go through, they help to develop who we are as well.
That's right. Even though evolutionists don't want us to believe so, we are more than just a bag of genes.
Oh, absolutely.
So, the question then becomes obvious. Should we as Christians do this? We have the technology.
It's going to happen, isn't it?
It's going to happen. I mean, you think about it. We know Ian Wilmot one day will probably receive an invitation to come to Sweden to receive a Nobel Prize because he was able to do something that men before him weren't able to do, and yet that's simply for cloning a sheep, a lowly sheep. Right. Think about the honors and the accolades that await the first human that can stand before the world and say, I cloned the first human being. They're going to be trying.
There's a race on.
That's right. So the question is, should we do this? If we look at biblical principles, we go all the way back to the book of Genesis, and we look at how God first formed marriage and the institution. We realize He made Adam, He made Eve. Eve was His helpmeet, somebody that was suitable for Him. With cloning, you don't need a helpmeet. You don't need to be married. We read in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 14, where Paul said, I desire that young women marry, they bear children, they guide the house. Notice the divinely laid down plan there. They're first to marry, which many people in our society need to understand. That comes first. Then you bear children, then you guide the house.
That's right.
With cloning, you don't need marriage. You don't need a mate. You simply, all you need is genetic material from somebody. This thing circumvents God's plan for the family unit at every single turn.
Now, it seems to me that the family is the very building block of a civilization. I don't know of any civilization in the history of the world that has ever existed without the family being at the very center of it. So scientifically, we're opening up a door here to say families aren't necessary anymore. I guess I'm asking you, can we culturally survive what science is giving us?
Well, if you look in past history at some of these empires such as Rome, right, at what happened to some of these civilized nations, some of these massive empires that once they grabbed hold of what we would call immoral practices,
that's right,
the civilization fell.
They didn't really fall to outside pressure. They fell from a lack of moral fortitude within inside.
That is exactly right.
And the greatest historians of Western culture have said that there's no doubt about it, it was the lack of morality that led to the fall of Rome.
That's right. That's right. So, in looking at cloning, Christians need to look at the implications. Cloning would allow homosexual couples to bear children. It would allow single adults to bear children. Surrogate parents are needed. Parents could then begin selecting their traits for their children. You could select the gender. If you wanted a male child, you'd simply take a cell from a male person. If you wanted a female, you would take a cell from a female person.
It's like pulling a slot on a vending machine and getting what you wanted.
That's right. I mean, you think about all of the implications. There would be individuals who would be interested in cloning humans to have spare parts,
yes,
or for large statistical studies. And so this thing is going to go out wide and broad, and as Christians we need to realize, hey, there are implications to this technology. Just because we can do it doesn't make it right.
No, that's right. There's lots of things that human beings are capable of doing that God said we shouldn't do.
Exactly.
And cloning would be very high on that list.
I was going to give an example of what happens every time that we tinker with God's plan, using Sarah and Abraham there in Genesis chapter 16 as an example. You probably remember that God told Sarah, He said, "You're going to have a child in your old age," and Sarah laughed. I think, not, if my memory serves me correct, she didn't just laugh once, she laughed twice. And foolish Abraham, you know, if he'd been a man of his house like Job was and said, "You speak like one of the fools," but he listened to Sarah. He went into Sarah's handmaid Hagar, and Ishmael resulted.
Tried to help God out. Yeah.
That's right. And if I were to ask you today, you know, was Ishmael the father of the Jewish race? No. At the end of that particular story, we learned what happened to Hagar and Ishmael. You remember that God told Abraham, "You take them on the edge of the wilderness and you send them out forever." Now that was his own flesh and blood.
Right.
And yet that's what happens when we began to tinker with God's original plan. I want us to talk about, for just a moment, you know, I made it sound very easy with Dr. Wilmot cloning a sheep. Like, he got up one day, he went out, he drank a cup of coffee and decided, I'll go to the lab and clone a sheep. It's not the way it happened. No. You know, you read that Nature article and you find out he failed 277 times before he was finally successful once. You walked into his lab and all you saw over the counter and the sinks were dead and dying embryos. So is that acceptable now that we've entered the realm of human cloning? I've got a screen here that shows just how many, if I can, there we go, let me pull it back up. Shows just how many embryos were needed to produce just one single clone. And I think you can look down through there and realize, ethically speaking, this is not something that's safe, that's not something that we want to be moving towards in the realm of human cloning.
Let's just be real clear here, Brad. When you're talking about embryos, you're talking about human life.
That's right.
Once an
living
egg,
creatures.
Once an egg and a sperm have joined together, we have a new living human being. That's not a theological statement, that is a scientific statement.
Exactly.
And so what you're saying is that in this whole process, we're going to kill probably thousands of living human beings in order to make one to prove we can do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, okay, what if, say, 2 or 3 months from now, on the cover of Time magazine, we have a picture of a healthy baby cloned boy?
Okay.
What's the next question? You know, to me, the next question becomes obvious, and that is, would a clone have a soul?
Yeah, that's a huge question.
In James chapter 2, verse 26, we read, "The body apart from the spirit is dead." You know, if I were to ask somebody, okay, why did you die? Well, I got hit by a truck or Parkinson's. You know, Ecclesiastes 12, verse 7 tells us that when the soul returns to God who gave it, that's when death happens. The body apart from the spirit is dead. If that's true, then the opposite or the converse of that statement must also be true, in that if the body is living, then the soul or the spirit must be present.
So you're saying if it's a human being and it's living, it's got a soul and a spirit.
If God allows this to happen, if He allows there to be a living, cloned individual, then according to Scripture, it's going to have a soul.
Then we as the church must treat that clone as a living human being.
Right. And it shouldn't be that surprising to us, because we know, genetically speaking, identical twins have actually closer genes than a clone does to the cell that it was taken from. So I don't think anybody would argue that identical twins, one of those doesn't have a soul.
I've never heard that argued. In fact, I've led identical twins to the Lord, and they both came to know Jesus, so I know they both had souls and spirits. You know, we got to take a break right now, but we're going to come back in just a couple of minutes, and I want to reason with you about what we as Christians should do. You know, we don't control our culture, we don't control the scientific community, but we've got to react to it, and we've got to know where we stand with it. And so I'm going to be coming back to search your mind with mine to see where Christians should stand on this and what we can do. So
Today's guest on Origins, Dr. Brad Harrub, is also the co-author of several books, including The Truth About Human Origins. If you have an interest in the creation-evolution controversy, you'll definitely want The Truth About Human Origins for your personal library. Book orders are being taken at 1-800-234-8.
With us here on Origins. I'm Donn Chapman and I'm the host, and we have with us today Dr. Brad Harrub, and he is here talking with us about human cloning. And we've decided that it's probably going to happen because it seems after other mammals have been cloned, seems to be almost a certainty within the next few years we're going to be picking up Time magazine and meeting a cloned human being. And we've said that from everything we can learn from Scripture, that cloned human being is going to have a soul. Brad, where does this take us as a culture? What are your concerns in that whole area?
Well, anytime a culture begins to devalue human life, they have obviously started down that slippery slope. You know, our country was founded on godly principles. I've got on the screen here, when our country declared its independence, it made note of there being a creator. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And yet we're acknowledging there was a Creator, and yet now we're toying with life. You think about that life in that Petri dish, it can't give informed consent. You know, it's pretty much at the subject to whatever those researchers want to do, and so there it lays. Wanted to ask the question, has our country forgotten God? You know, right before Moses, as he was warning the people before they went into that promised land, he warned them by saying, you know, before you get over there, when you all have eaten and you've built goodly houses and your bellies are full, do not forget the Lord thy God. And I'm afraid here in our own land of milk and honey, we may be at a point where we have forgotten Almighty God.
I think that's an incredible comparison, because, you know, the context of that is when they were in the wilderness and they had to depend upon God every day, literally, for their bread to fall from the sky and for water to come sometimes from a rock. You didn't get very far away from God because you needed that desperately. But the context is, God says, when you get in your own houses and you're digging copper out of those sides of the hill and you're planting crops and they're producing the harvest, you're going to get to thinking, you know, I'm doing this. I don't need God.
That is right.
And you know, I've done some reading about America at its founding, and all of our founding fathers, George Washington, Ben Franklin, even Thomas Jefferson, acknowledged that we would not have won our War of Independence if it hadn't been for the providence of God.
That's right.
And so during the days when we were in utter desperation to see this nation established, we were glad to acknowledge the hand and the provision of God.
Exactly.
But now, a couple hundred years later, when we've built our factories and we think we're the smartest people that have ever lived, and we think we've caused the blessing of America, it's pretty easy to forget God.
That's right.
And we are losing here one of the things that made America great and that brought God's blessing, and that is recognizing and honoring the sanctity of human life.
That's right.
So this is bigger than cloning, isn't it?
You know, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, we were told that we were made in the image and likeness of Almighty God. And, you know, we need to keep in the forefront of our minds, if human life has absolutely little to no value, what are we saying about the gift of God's Son?
Yeah.
Why did He come to this earth?
Jesus didn't come to die for the dolphins. He came to die for the humans.
Exactly.
Because they were of sacred and infinite worth.
That's right.
And if we forget that, then we're out of line with God's value on human beings. You know, folks, this has been an incredibly important show. we need shows like this. We need people like Dr. Brad to help us through this scientific minefield of ethics that science is creating for us. I thank you so much for coming and joining in. If you've got questions, don't be afraid to write to me at Origins, Cornerstone Television, Wall, PA, or email me at the address there on the screen. And we'll continue to look to creation scientists for some good information to help us know. You know, I want to remind you of something, and that is that it's God's view that He created you. That ought to be your worldview too. I hope you'll join me again as we continue to take the evidence of science to confirm the truth of creation. See you next time. God bless you.
Like a copy of the PowerPoint information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 452 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins program number 452, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.